Imagine stepping into a time machine whose dial is set to 430 million years ago. The world that unfolds is a quieter, wetter, stranger place. Oceans roll where continents now stand, island chains dot equatorial seas, and life is learning new tricks on land and in water. This is the Silurian Period, a chapter of Earth's story. The Silurian Period lasted about 23.5 million years, a time when battered ecosystems folded themselves back together after a great extinction and took bold evolutionary steps. Let's travel there in thought. Feel the salt on the air, hear the hush of shallow seas, and watch the first green threads of forests reaching for sunlight. The Silurian begins as the planet's stage is reset. A major extinction at the end of the Ordovician had wiped out a large portion of marine life. But nature, impatient and inventive, moved on. When the Silurian opens, seas are rising again. The glaciers that pinched the poles in the previous age have mostly retreated. Warm, shallow seas spread over low-lying landmasses, creating broad continental shelves and a mosaic of habitats: tidal flats, coral-studded reefs, tidal channels, and lagoonal bays. These watery realms are bustling with life, and on the fringes of water and land, a revolution is quietly beginning. Picture the continents: Gondwana, a vast southern landmass. Gondwana drifts toward the South Pole, wrapped in lingering cold at its heart. Meanwhile, smaller landmasses, Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia, shuffle together near the equator, beginning the long embrace that will one day form a new supercontinent. Where they meet, the Earth groans and folds. Mountain ranges rise in a slow, monumental lift, called the Caledonian orogeny. Rivers cut away at these newborn highlands, carrying sediments into the warm seas and building the sedimentary tapestries where fossils will one day tell the tale. The seas of the Silurian are astonishingly productive. Brachiopods, shell-bearing animals that look like ancient clams, carpet the seafloor. Trilobites, those famed arthropods, with segmented armor, crawl and swim in abundance, recovering and diversifying after their earlier losses. Crinoids, stalked relatives of modern sea lilies, sway in currents like underwater flowers. Rugose corals and branching stromatoporoids build reefs that sometimes rise into bustling oases, teeming with tentaculatoids, bryozoans, and small shelled mollusks. Among them glide the predators: Eurypterids, the sea scorpions, some as large and imposing as a human being would have felt to an ancient swimmer. These Eurypterids hunt shallow lagoons with powerful paddles and fearsome claws, their glossy, segmented bodies sometimes preserved in exquisite detail in Silurian shales. Beneath the waves, a quieter revolution is taking place in fish anatomy. Jawless fishes, the primitive armored ostracoderms, are still present, but their dominance is waning. Into this gap come the first true jawed fishes, an innovation that will change the course of vertebrate life. Placoderms, armored fishes with bony plates, patrol the shallows like armored tanks. Acanthodians, sometimes called spiny sharks, appear with bold spines. And bony scales, an evolutionary bridge leading toward later cartilaginous fish. And the earliest bony fishes, the osteichthyans, are beginning their long ascent. These early bony fishes pave the way for future diversity, splitting into lineages that will become lobe-finned fishes and ray-finned fishes, and eventually give rise to the vertebrates that walk on land. It's tempting to see the Silurian as a time of stable warmth and calm seas, but reality is more dramatic. The climate flickers. Carbon and oxygen isotopes trapped in ancient rocks whisper a story of repeated perturbations. Pulses of cooling and warming, sea level highs and lows, sudden and sometimes violent shifts that echo in the fossil record. The Urveichen, Molde, and Lau events are fingerprints of these changes. Brief crises recorded by isotope shifts and by changes in the fortunes of marine life. Sea levels rose and fell repeatedly, leaving behind alternating layers of sediment, evaporite basins, and fossil-rich beds that are windows into changing environments. Yet it is on the terrestrial margins, where land and sea meet, that one of the most transformative stories of the Silurian plays out. Life creeps and then strides onto the land. For hundreds of millions of years before, life had been largely aquatic, but by the Middle Silurian, the first true vascular plants begin to appear. These are not towering trees, but small, pioneering pioneers, simple stalks with branches and sporangia, hardy and revolutionary. Cooksonia, one of the earliest known vascular plants, stands like a tiny green candle, a few centimeters tall, with simple branching stems and spore-producing tips. This modest architecture is the blueprint for everything that follows. Not long after, plants with more complex structures, primitive relatives of modern club mosses, like Baragwanathia, begin to show leaves and branching patterns suggesting a longer evolutionary history than we had first imagined. These early plants are the unsung architects of future landscapes. They anchor soils, slow erosion, trap sediments, and create microhabitats. They also forge new partnerships beneath the surface. Fungi, especially the groups that form mycorrhizal associations, spread through the soil and lock arms with plant roots. These partnerships, ancient and intimate, boost nutrient uptake and help plants colonize dry land. The soil beneath early plants teems with nematophytes and other enigmatic organisms, networked, thread-like life forms that feed, stabilize, and transform the substrate. Together, plants and fungi start building the first terrestrial ecosystems. Mats of green along streams and lakes, pockets of vegetation in floodplains, and the earliest soil horizons capable of supporting more complex life. Where plants go, animals follow. The Silurian gives us some of the earliest convincing evidence of terrestrial arthropods, millipedes, centipedes, and primitive arachnids crawling among plant litter and soil. These pioneers are small but crucial. Millipedes move detritus, churning decaying plant matter into soil, while the first air-breathing arachnids take on predatory roles. Their bodies carry early adaptations to life on land, spiracles and trachea for breathing air, and limbs adapted for walking on solid ground. The ecology is simple but functional, a nascent food web where detritivores and grazers process organic matter. Predators hunt in the leaf litter, and the interplay of life builds complexity from the ground up. The Silurian story is not only one of steady progress, it is a tale of experimentation and risk. Ecosystems recover from shocks and push into new niches. Corals and stromatoporoids build reefs that sometimes erupt into hotbeds of diversity, and then wane. Brachiopods reinvent ways of living under new environmental stresses. Bryozoans and sponges form colonies with surprising territoriality and innovation. Many groups expand geographically, yet others remain stubbornly localized. Endemism is rife as marine shelves and isolated basins sculpt unique communities. If we linger on a fossil bed from the Wenlock series, the Middle Silurian, we might find a quiet menagerie of small armored fishes, the first tiny plants, and the remains of soft-bodied invertebrates preserved in shallow anoxic lagoons. The Ludlow beds, slightly later, may yield evidence of branching plants like Baragwanathia and the earliest known millipedes, milestones that hint at an increasingly interconnected world where land and water exchange energy in new ways. The Silurian is also a landscape of contrasts. Atmospheric CO2 levels, for example, were high, much higher than today, contributing to greenhouse conditions in parts of the period. Yet the repeated isotopic excursions and short-lived glaciations show that climate was not unchanging. Sea levels rose perhaps as much as 140 meters between lowest and highest Silurian stands, swallowing continents, and then retreating to reveal new coastal plains. These changes forced life to adapt or move. The record is a storybook of resilience, organisms that survived, shifted, and radiated into niches left vacant by extinction. From the vantage of deep time, the Silurian is a pivot point. It is a time when the blueprint of modern ecosystems begins to appear. Vascular plants that will someday give rise to forests, arthropods that learn to breathe air and walk on land, and fishes experimenting with jaws and body plans that will lead in a few 100 million years to creatures that crawl from the shallows and become our distant ancestors. The period is rich in firsts and in quiet consolidations of life's complexity. There is also a human story woven into the study of the Silurian. In the 1830s, a Scottish scientist named Roderick Murchison walked the rocky edges of South Wales and recognized a sequence of rocks packed with fossils unlike any seen before. He named this slice of time after a Celtic tribe, the Silures. Murchison's work, alongside contemporaries like Adam Sedgwick and Charles Lapworth, helped to build the modern geological timescale, though not without controversy and spirited debate. These pioneers argued, disagreed, and refined definitions as they traced rock layers across the British Isles and continental Europe. Their efforts anchored the Silurian in the lexicon of Earth history and invited generations of geologists and paleontologists to read its pages. What does the Silurian teach us in a world of hurried news cycles and instant change? On one level, it is a lesson in resilience and reinvention. After a catastrophic loss, life did not simply return to former glory. It reinvented itself in novel ways, finding technological solutions like jaws, vascular tissue, and mycorrhizal partnerships that open new possibilities. On another level, it reminds us that environmental change can be abrupt and transformative. Sea levels that rose and fell dramatically reshaped habitats and forced migrations and extinctions. The record of climate excursions in the Silurian underscores how sensitive life can be to shifts in temperature and chemistry. And there is a poetic layer, too. Think of a tiny Cooksonia stalk pushing through damp soil hundreds of millions of years ago. A fragile green spear that, multiplied 1 billion times over, would one day make forests, soils, and the air we breathe. Think of a millipede crawling across an ancient floodplain, unknowingly setting the stage for complex food webs. These fragile acts add up. The Silurian is full of beginnings, the slow, persistent work of life shaping landscapes and atmosphere in ways that ripple forward to our present. Visually, the Silurian world is cinematic. Imagine shallow seas glittering under a warm sun, reefs rising like underwater cities, eurypterids prowling along silty bottoms, and small plants speckling the edges of streams. The sky is perhaps hazy with greenhouse humidity. Storms sometimes lash coasts, depositing broken shells that fossilize as coquina layers. Mountains rise and are ground down in a perpetual interplay of uplift and erosion. Sediments carried from highlands create prism-like deposits along continental margins, letters in stone that future geologists will read. To close our journey, consider that the Silurian is neither ancient myth nor simple precursor. It is a complex era of stabilization, experimentation, and ecological innovation. It teaches us that major evolutionary transitions can occur in bursts, responses to crises, opportunities, and the relentless tinkering of natural selection. It shows how life can adapt to new environments through cooperation as much as competition. Plants need fungi, soils need detritivores, reefs need builders and encrusters working together. It hints at the deep interconnectedness that threads through Earth's history. So when you next pass a creek or stand on a coastline, spare a thought for the deep past beneath your feet. The stones may whisper of shallow seas, and the fossils embedded there tell of life pushing boundaries. The Silurian is the quiet architect of later landscapes, a world where the first green shoots of terrestrial life took hold and where jaws and legs began their long experiments. It is a period of humble pioneers and dramatic change, a chapter that reminds us how life persists, innovates, and reshapes the planet in ways both small and grand. End with a breath. The Silurian exhales slowly across deep time, leaving behind a legacy of beginnings. It is the whisper that becomes a chorus, the single step that becomes a march. In that whisper and that step, we find the roots of forests, the ancestors of our limbs, and the ancient rhythms of a world forever in motion.